Do you familiar with Cubism? No, maybe some of you know what is Cubism. Well, let me give you a simple explanation. Cubism is a visual art style of the 20th century that was created in Paris between 1907 and 1914. Also, Cubist painters were bound to not copy the form, texture, color, and space. Rather than that, they introduced a new reality in paintings that depicted radically fragmented objects. Cubism have two types of movement, which is analytical cubism and synthetic cubism. Analytical cubism is developed from 1910 to 1912. That most of them look like this. They have a compact and dense forms and grow larger as they diffuse toward the edges of the canvas. Frequently, in this period, they combine representational motifs with letters. Then what is the difference with synthetic cubism? Synthetic cubism is usually using a lot of foreign material like newspaper, tobacco wrappers, and pasted on the canvas and combined with painted area. But you might be wondering, who is the one that started the Cubism period? Why they created Cubism? When we talk about Cubism, most of people will only know Pablo Picasso with his famous Cubism painting like the Weeping Woman. But do you know Cubism is not only started with Picasso, but also his friend George Braque? Now, you might be thinking, who is George Braque? Where did he come from? George Braque is a French artist that born in Argenteuil, France on 13 May 1882. He lived around the period of Fauvism, Cubism, analytical Cubism, and synthetic Cubism. You might wanting to know how is George's early life. During his childhood moment, he was taught about painting techniques from a young age by his father because his father managed a decorative painting business. George's earliest paintings were made in the Fauvist style coordinated with Henri Matisse. He contributed his colorful Fauvist paintings to his first exhibition at the Salon des Independents in 1906. But despite on that, he was extremely interested by a visit to Picasso's studio in 1907. After the encounter, the two artists forged a friendship, and "We would get together every single day," George said. Then, his painting style drastically changed to become like Picasso's. There is some issue after he presented his landscape paintings in which scenes were distilled into basic shapes and color. This piqued the French art critic Louis Boxel to coin the term Cubism by describing George's work as bizarrist cubics. During this pre-war, George and Picasso made a large contribution to modern art through the exploration of Cubism, which is the analytical and synthetic phases of movement. George and Picasso worked in synchronicity until his return from war in 1914. But when Picasso began to paint figuratively, known as interwar classicism, George felt his friend had betrayed the Cubist system and continued on his own. However, he is still influenced by Picasso's work, especially regarding to papier collage. His collage, basically based on geometric shapes and interrupted by musical instruments, grapes, or furniture. Later on 1919, viewers noted a more limited palette at George's first post-war solo show. Yet, he resolutely stuck to Cubist rules about depicting objects from multifaceted perspective in geometrically patterned ways. From this, he continued as a true Cubist longer than did Picasso. In 1929, George took up landscape painting once again, using new, bright color that he picked from Picasso and Matisse. Then, in 1930s, George began to portray Greek heroes and deities, though he claimed the subject was stripped of their symbolism and up to view through a purely non-formal lens. In the latter half of the 1930s, George embarked on painting his Vanita series, which he existentially considered death and suffering. What about his period of art? Well, I already mentioned before, his art developed around the period of Fauvism and Cubism, but most of them is a Cubism because he really liked Cubists. All of his art, no matter what period, they will always about nature, musical instrument, and still life. George was most interested in showing how objects look when viewed over time in different temporal space and pictorial planes. But do you know, around the time of World War II, his paintings were more to heavy metal like death and supper. The objects used in his still life were highly personal to George. However, he did not reveal these meanings. Skulls, for example, were objects he painted repeatedly at the onset of World War II. In 1944, when World War II ended, George began to paint lighter subjects like flowers, billiard tables, and garden chairs. His final series of 8 canvases made from 1948 to 1955. Each title, Atelier or Studio, depicted imagery that represented the artist's inner thoughts on each object rather than clues to the outside world. At the very end of his life, George painted birds repeatedly as the perfect symbol of his obsession with space and movement. His most popular painting is Houses at Woodstock, 1908. George's works of this period mark a stylistic change toward muted color palettes and simple geometric forms. He simplified the houses and trees in painting to their barest geometric forms, while paradoxically using shading to create depth within these shapes. There is some debate as to whether this was the first Cubist landscape or simply a precursor to Cubism. These elements form the basis of the Cubist style. What impact does George Braque did? Well, George is remembered as a progenitor of Cubism, who was both rational and sensuous in his still life paintings. George is also a celebrated colorist and can be traced to contemporary art to those painters who worked with color in similar ways. But perhaps he is most remembered for his use of collage